It's the week beginning Monday the 17th of August, and this is Business Unwrapped, brought to you by Volkswagen Commercial Vehicles. In this bonus podcast series, I talk to industry experts about how companies can change for the better after the coronavirus pandemic. I'm Olly Mann. Let's unwrap the business week. And joining me today from the week's digital team, it is the boss man, Holden Frith. And our special guest this week is Dr. Gabrielle Walker, author of 4 books about our planet and climate change and related issues. Hi, Gabrielle.
Hi.
Hi. I know you spend a lot of time speaking at events, usually. Do you have mixed feelings about those all being virtual now? Good for the environment, bad for engaging people, perhaps?
Yeah, it's deeply weird just to sit there in your own room talking into a microphone and not getting any reaction from anyone. But on the other hand, I get reaction from my cats, and that's good enough.
Good. You have a mobile audience at hand.
Quite a critical audience, actually. They're not actually very supportive, I have to say.
Okay, so we'll be talking about environmental issues. Holden, what have you chosen as your business story of the week?
Here's why we should be ready for a battery of clean machines.
Lithium-ion batteries are in our phones, in our cars, and they even won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry this year. They've revolutionized the way we power our gadgets. But scientists want to make batteries that are even more powerful. One way to do that would be to replace their graphite anodes with ones made from lithium metal. That swap could double their charge storage capacity. But lithium metal has some problems. For example, as a battery charges, lithium ions can deposit irregularly on the anode, forming spiky structures called dendrites that can grow long enough to reach the other electrode and short-circuit the battery, possibly causing a fire. This is a bigger problem for lithium metal than for other anode materials like graphite. And the dendrite problem has limited the practical applications for lithium metal batteries thus far.
Kerry Jansen reporting for CNEN. You can discover the full video on the CEN Online YouTube channel. What's the story?
The news is that batteries using this more powerful technology, lithium metal rather than lithium ion, are about to enter production thanks to Tokyo Metropolitan University and their spin-off company Freedom. The breakthrough they've made is in solving the problem we just heard about, which is that these batteries have in the past tended to burst into flames. That has limited their commercial appeal, but there are good reasons why we would want to have a solution to that problem so that these batteries can start to be used more widely. They are, according to Tokyo University, able to deliver twice the energy from the same size unit as a previous technology. And car makers all around the world are desperate for this sort of lightweight, powerful, flexible battery because they're all looking to vastly increase the number of electric cars and vans they're putting onto the market.
Yeah, so a new generation of battery with 10 times the energy of its forebears is how the FT put it. They're not known for their sensationalist headlines, so is that an accurate reflection of what it could do? It could, I presume, power a plane with that kind of energy.
The company that is behind this technology does say it would like to power flying cars in the long run. We are quite a long way off that at the moment, but this is a really important technology because the limiting factor really for electric cars at the moment is all in the battery. People are very aware now of range anxiety, but there's also the question of how long these batteries last, how many times you can recharge them, how long it takes to get them back up to usable power. Although we've seen regular incremental improvement in the lithium-ion batteries we're used to at the moment, people are really looking for this sort of step change in technology that will allow us to leap ahead.
And is it reasonable, Gabriel, for them to be looking for that sort of thing, bearing in mind that, as Holden says, there are incremental changes being made to electric vehicles all the time anyway?
I think the batteries are the real key, and not just for electric vehicles, not just for electric cars, but for heavy transport, for ships, for short-haul planes, lots of the so-called hard-to-abate sector, the areas that are really very hard to electrify. And I think there's been too much attention, in a way, paid to electric, like passenger vehicles, as if that was the only thing we needed to do. And really, we need to increase the power of batteries, decrease the weight, increase the efficiency for loads of different applications as well.
But there has been incremental change, hasn't there? It's a different landscape now when you talk about just your common and garden electric car than it was 5 years ago.
Oh, totally. And, there's been, particularly in the weight and also increasing attention in looking at the whole life cycle emissions. So not just how many emissions when you're driving the car, but from when it's made in the first place, or the materials it's made of, and how to ensure that it's as low impact as possible. Yeah,
so let's talk about that, because businesses are going to make these vehicles, whether equipped with this new generation of battery or the current generation. How sustainable is the manufacturing process, and is it changing?
It is changing, and I think in not just in electric vehicles, but right across the board, there's so much more attention now being paid, more realisation that there are emissions that we haven't really been thinking about. I think it's something that I do find a bit frustrating, that there's a kind of exclusivism that it's my solution and not yours, and my sector and not yours, and not really thinking about the picture as a whole. And when you look at the entire life cycle of something, you get a different answer from if you look at just using it. And that kind of pattern is coming out really in businesses that are not just saying we're going to reduce our own emissions, but saying we're going to look at our supply chains, we're going to look at our customer emissions, and we're really going to see everything that we touch, everything we're responsible for, we're going to try to reduce. And that's a very different mindset from the one that just says, okay, let's look at our own little piece of it.
In small businesses, though, Holden, it's natural, isn't it, going through the current crisis that we are, to say some of this green stuff is a nice to have. I don't mean for the future of the planet, it's obviously essential. But for the future of our business, it's a nice add-on. But we have to get down to our core business at the moment, and that is retaining our customers and making sure that we have as many employees as we can keep on our books.
I think that's probably true. And I think businesses are perhaps always going to be less swayed by emotion, perhaps even less swayed by a sense of personal virtue than individual consumers. And that's why the crucial part of greening the economy is going to be about making the benefits financial, making the benefits about convenience. Electric commercial vehicles are going to have to stand on their own merits. And there's no reason why they can't. It's, all new technologies are expensive to start with, but as they bed in, they become more and more economical. And there's actually a lot of good economic advantages about electric power rather than fossil fuels. There's great economies to be had in terms of running costs. And although there's going to be significant investment to make that transition from petrol and diesel to electricity, I think we are approaching that tipping point where businesses are going to be able to take the rational financial decision to make that leap.
I would say that one of the most extraordinary things that's happened, perhaps in the last year and a half, is that tipping point has been passed. I really think all of this is now mainstreamed. And one of the things that astonished me about this year, I work a lot with big companies and small, and particularly the big corporations. I've been talking to the senior executives there. I've been saying, are you slowing down now? Now COVID's hit and you need to get on with your core business. And they said, if anything, we're speeding up. We're bringing pivots forward. The strategy plans that we had in the next 5 years we're bringing into this year. And I said, why? And they said, because the investors have not let up the pressure they've been putting on us. In fact, they've increased it. And the investors are doing that because in this new world, they've realised that this is going to be the future. This is what customers are going to want. This is how the world's going to be structured. And therefore, this is the way to make money. I think you can now have both. You can do well and do good. And in fact, if you don't follow, this is the way you're going to lose your money.
But I did make that distinction between small business and those huge businesses that you have worked with, Gabrielle. I know you've advised companies like Deutsche Bank and Shell and Unilever to help them with their energy and climate policies. If you have a few dozen employees, you can see how these green issues might get sidelined. It is a risk.
I can see that, and it is a risk. And what I would say too, though, is that in a time like this, when we're heading for massive recessions around the world, when business is going to be very tough, the question is, how do you distinguish yourself? And if you look at where the markets are and where the markets are going, this rise of millennials who have this, who are the customers, what's their driving force, where's the demand going to be, is one point. That's where, if you can show that you have purpose, if you can show that you're contributing to the world, that's how you're going to win the market share. And then on top of that, if you're prepared for the kind of shocks that come, if you have the right resilience, and if also you're prepared for the technologies that are coming on board that everyone's going to be using, you're actually much better placed. And so it's a balance, and it's a good investment, I think, for SMEs as well as for the big guys.
Yeah, and that savvy, environmentally concerned generation coming up, Holden, they are savvy. They do check social media. They look into the companies that claim to have a green agenda, and they're looking out for greenwashing. We've talked about it on the show before, but companies that claim to have green credentials are effectively continuing to destroy the planet with their other activities. They're onto them.
Yeah, and I think that as the number of electric private cars in circulation grows, the diesel delivery van that's rolling up to everybody's doors with the products they've ordered on Amazon or elsewhere, those are going to stand out more and more. So that sort of pressure, it's not only visible, it's audible. And that sort of pressure to do something that is both good for the environment and is very symbolic too, that kind of consumer pressure, I think, will be brought to bear quite quickly.
And is there a feeling, Gabrielle, in what you do when you are having these kinds of meetings with businesses and CEOs, that I don't want to talk about this in bad taste, really, because obviously so many people have become ill over COVID, but that actually this is an opportunity?
There are quite a few senior executives who've wanted to make radical changes but haven't really been able to because they've also got to continue as usual. And given that everything has changed, this is a chance to hit a great big reset button. And what the other thing I was going to say, and this applies particularly to electric vehicles and generally to the whole shebang, is that one of the biggest things that changed is I'm a chemist by background, and so I was thrilled to be looking at a news story about lithium and its properties. I used to study that and I actually did research on it, so that was quite cool. But it's not just the technologies, it's also the mindsets. And I would say that the biggest change that's happened in the whole electric vehicle sector is that they've gone from being the sort of things that well-meaning, self-righteous people who wanted to spend lots of money to have something very boring used to drive, to the coolest, the fastest, the ones with the acceleration, the ones with the drive, the ones with the style. And so people want electric vehicles. And that's, I think, that same thing, if I'm looking at the investors who are now putting pressure on companies big and small, there's a whole mindset shift. It's not, I want to be noble, it's this is how I'm going to make my money. And I think, those new narratives are going to have a much bigger part to play than we might realise.
Yeah, I think it's quite clear that not too many years ago, choosing an electric car was an eccentric thing to do. But it feels as if we're not that many years off the point where it will feel eccentric not to want an electric car.
Yeah. Yeah. The UK government's been saying it wants to ban new fossil fuel vehicles from 2035. And there's now pressure coming to bring that forward to 2030, less than 10 years. And what's interesting to me is that pressure's coming from NGOs, but the pressure's also coming from the likes of Shell. Shell's actually said, no, we want it to be 2030. And I think when that kind of consensus is coming out about these things, then the shift isn't very far away.
Okay, now you've outed yourself as a lithium geek. I'm going to ask you a question about Holden's story that I wouldn't have done before, which is, why is this happening in Japan? Have they put more money, more research into this stuff, and can the West compete?
That's a really interesting question, because the time was that the Japanese were the ones to turn to for anything that had this kind of technological, the chemistry and the technology. And then it really felt like they'd fallen away, didn't it? And that the innovation was coming from elsewhere.
Yeah, particularly in consumer cycles. This is Panasonic that are investing in this stuff. And they're a name in consumer technology that feels a bit 90s to a lot of people when they're buying a phone or whatever.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be, if you think about who's going to win in this whole game, are the companies that can keep reinventing themselves and the ones that have the biggest imagination and creativity for innovation, both in technology and in approach to customers and in mindset and in positioning, and putting all those together is going to be very important. But I thought exactly the same thing when I was reading it. It's that you get shifts in the centres of excellence in these kinds of things. And it feels Japan's coming back up again, and that the likes of the US maybe are shrinking back.
So is there an opportunity? Could a British company compete in this space?
There's always an opportunity. And right now, it's a horrifying time to be in a time of great change, but it's also an incredibly exciting time to be, because that's when you can have the most individual difference. And if everything's going along swimmingly and we all have the technologies we need, trying to break in as an SME with a good idea is really difficult. But I think one of the things about this battery story, in the story it said it's hard to break in. The cars all have kind of cozy relationships with their battery providers. But if someone comes along with a way to make this lighter, make this more efficient, that everyone's going to be on it. And that's not always going to be true. So good time to be in this game.
Yeah, on the issue of supply chains and their sustainability and their resilience, that's something that's clearly been brought into focus by the pandemic. It's also something that I know some European car makers are worried about, particularly in what we've just been talking about, the fact that most of this battery technology is emerging in Asia, and they are trying to counter that by producing their own battery factories here. There's one going ahead in northern Norway, which is intending to be entirely carbon neutral. So they're using renewable energy from beginning to end of battery production. And that's addressing, both the sustainability of the business, but the resilience, and also developing areas of expertise in this part of the world too.
And I want to ask you just about the watchword sustainable prosperity. If you're listening to this and you run a business, what should you be doing to try and make your business ready for the next 20 years? That's a big question.
Yeah, I think you need to be looking at two particular things. It's how resilient are you? And this whole COVID experience has shown us what it's like. We felt viscerally what it's like to have a systemic shock hit the system and how expensive it is. And I and many others have been saying for years that this is the kind of systemic shock that we're risking from climate change if we don't solve it. So how resilient are your supply chains? How resilient are your customers? How resilient is your business to the kinds of shocks that can come from climate change, financial shocks as well as direct climate-related ones? And your your investments, how likely are they to be stranded? So that's one thing, one kind of auditing thing to do. And then the second thing to do is to look at where the opportunities lie in terms of positioning you for a new market share, or in terms of looking at your own emissions as well as the emissions of your supply chain and customers. And I think measuring it, figuring out what you can reduce and offsetting the rest with a really gold standard offset, and then making sure that everybody knows about that are three of the simplest and most powerful things that any company, big or small, can do to show their leadership in this world.
And are there some resources that you could actually refer people to that don't require you getting an expensive consultant in at the moment?
Yeah, for example, for when I said about the offsetting, I mean, there are plenty of government-related resources or smaller startups that will help with measuring emissions. In terms of offsetting, Gold Standard is fantastic and it's very simple to use. It's like a marketplace. They vet everything to make sure that the offsets you're investing in are actually real, would only happen with this money, all of those things. And that was actually set up by a whole host of NGOs, and so it's incredibly trustworthy. So that's a very simple set of steps. It's look at all of your emissions. There's calculators online. WWF has a calculator where you can try to work out your emissions and then reduce them, and then make sure people know about it, because for two reasons. One is you position yourself, and the other is you make other people want to do it too, and both of those make you a winner.
Thank you, Gabrielle Walker and Holden. Frith, that is your Business Week Unwrapped. Thanks to our sponsors too. This series of Business Unwrapped is brought to you by the new electric Volkswagen ABT e-Transporter 6.1, the emissions-free way to keep your business on the road. Business Unwrapped will be back next week. In the meantime, do subscribe to our weekly show, The Week Unwrapped, on your podcast app of choice, and these bonus eps will drop into your feed as well. I've been Olly Mann. The music is by Tom Morby, the producers Sarah Miles and Matt Hill at Rethink Audio. Until next time, bye-bye.